Hey guys, so in my time as a Battlefield YouTuber, I have noticed that there doesn't seem to be much understanding regarding how Battlefield movement has changed throughout the years and what the differences are and how the differences impact the gameplay of the game. In fact, whenever I read comments about Battlefield movement, people just seem to comment how they perceive the game rather than how the game actually is or can be in regards to movement. So in today's video, we'll be comparing Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, Battlefield 5, and Battlefield 2042's movement differences so you can see how the games have changed throughout the years and what the differences are between certain actions you can perform in the game. I will also try my best to explain why certain movements are important, and I will also try to explain the more advanced functions for some of the movement options, as well as, when possible, provide some sort of POV or clip of what it looks like. And it should be noted, I'm making this video because I personally feel, as a long time Battlefield player and a long-time Battlefield content creator, that a lot of Battlefield players don't seem to care about the most important part of Battlefield, which is the gameplay. In fact, I feel as though the Battlefield community has really poor priorities. Namely, I see a lot of people caring too much about graphics, caring too much about destruction, complaining that you can't destroy every single thing they look at, complaining about the audio not being too realistic, complaining about certain things not being too realistic, when in fact Battlefield has actually never been realistic, and Battlefield has never really been designed with much realism in mind, particularly pertaining to the gameplay, and this includes movement, gunplay, and other things. So, with that being said, I'm going to try my best to remember each and every single movement trick from these 5 different Battlefield games, and we're going to start with Battlefield 3. If you enjoy the content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Delta Force is right around the corner, and I will be covering that. So, let's jump into the greatest Battlefield of all time, considered by many, Battlefield 3. Well, this is certainly very nostalgic, ladies and gentlemen, and also very blue. We'll be using the tunnels of Operation Metro to demonstrate Battlefield 3's movement. So the first thing, obviously, the strafe speed. Basically the walking speed. What is it like? As you can see, very sort of standard. I would even say it's on the slower side. It's worth noting, when I strafe to the left, using the A key, and the right, using the D key, it is instantaneous. Meaning, there isn't a period of acceleration happening. Typically, in maybe some more modern games, trying to change directions while strafing, it would be a little slower in between strafes. This can feel, better or worse depending on your opinion, but I prefer responsiveness, and I think a lot of people do. So, actually, I think BF3 strafing is just fine. Now, it's worth noting that in pretty much all Battlefield games, the strafe speed is different compared to hipfire than it is to ADS. So what that means is you strafe slower in ADS compared to how fast you strafe un-ADS'd in your hipfire. In terms of sprint speed, again, I would say this is very standard. Nothing crazy going on here. Worth noting in Battlefield 3 that you can chain a couple jumps together. Nothing crazy. This isn't bunny hopping, ladies and gentlemen. This is not Quake. You are simply jumping once and jumping again. It's very simple. Can't do anything really crazy with it. You can't, flick around and do all this air strafing. You can air strafe a little bit, though. I'll demonstrate that by just running in a straight line, jumping, and then hitting either my A or D key. As you can see, I hit my A key in midair, and I am a little farther to the left. Now I'm going to do it with my D key, and as you can see, I'm a little farther to the right. A very unknown movement trick in Battlefield 3 is you can actually vault while aiming down sights. Comment down below, did you know this existed? Because I can confidently say I have never used this in my life. Now, the vaulting of Battlefield 3, as you can see, it's a little dated. But you can vault things like this that are sort of knee height, maybe a little higher than this, such as this. a little buggy as well. Crouching. Crouching can be used to either crouch into a peak like this, or crouch out of, crouch into a peak, or stand up out of a crouch into a peak. And you can also use crouching a little bit in gunfights. So what I mean by that is, say you're trying to fight someone, you know, bang, bang, bang. You can throw a little crouch here and there in the gunfight, and it will make a slight difference to how you look on their screen. By far the most important part of Battlefield gameplay, or at least by far one of the most important parts to Battlefield's movement in terms of depth and just giving a player something to utilize, is jump peeking. Jump peeking is controversial in Battlefield, but a lot of people don't seem to realize that it's been a thing for almost 15 years. Can you believe that? Now, jump peeking is a very simple concept. I run, I jump, and I aim down sights to shoot you, right? Very simple, very straightforward. There are some nuances, though. You notice when I jump peek, I land and my sight wobbles. You can remedy this using the quote-unquote ADS stabilization jump. The way you do this is, say you want to peek or land with your M16 out, and you want the sight to be stable while landing. You would actually run at the jump peak with your Magnum out, or your secondary, and in midair, you're going to hit the crouch key. How many times you hit the crouch key determines if you land crouched or standing. 1 time for crouched, 2 times for standing. And I use toggle crouch for this, so it could be different for people that use hold crouch. So I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to jump, hit my crouch key 1 time, and I should land crouched with the M16 with no sight bounce. As you can see, I did that the way I was supposed to do it. Now, you can also do this with the Magnum. I will do the exact opposite. I'm going to do 2 crouches, so I should land standing with no sight wobble on the Magnum. Yep, and as you can see, it worked. You also notice that you sort of slide a little bit on the ground when you do this. I'll do it one more time. I slid about, I don't know, maybe I landed there. So slid about maybe 2 feet-ish. And this can be used to keep your peaks really, really tight. For instance, if I wanted to, say, land exactly right here, but I want my sight to be, you know, very stable on this corner, you can time a jump peak with, you know, your skill and your ability to land basically right there, you know? You can place it very well. And that is really all the things I know about Battlefield 3's movement. I'm sure someone that played maybe Battlefield 3 professionally or competitively way back then will comment down below, Enders, you forgot this. I'm sorry. This game is 10 years old or 12 years old or whatever. I apologize. Let's move on to Battlefield 4. This is also very nostalgic. The test range of Battlefield 4. Now, Battlefield 4's movement, in general, is kind of infamous because of certain movement glitches, namely Zuzu, Muzu, Vuzu, and Ruzu. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's probably a good thing, and it probably means you have less brain damage than the people that do know what I'm talking about. That was a joke, guys. Let's take a joke. I know it's 2024. Now, I won't be going over the movement glitches in Battlefield 4, as, well, they're glitches. You can use them in the gameplay of Battlefield 4, and people do, but it's not necessarily something that was intentional, and it's not necessarily something that is part of the base movement, let's say. I'm going to be focusing on the pure base movement of Battlefield 4. So there are some similarities, obviously, to Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4's movement. Battlefield 4, I would say, is just a little snappier and a little more responsive. As you can see, you know, crouch spamming matters a lot more in this game. And as you can see, the ADS stabilization jump is still here from Battlefield 3, as it is a legacy mechanic, like I mentioned. This can help you line up your peaks more accurately, and again, just gives the game a little bit more depth. Now, comparing the strafe speeds. The strafe speeds are kind of largely very similar. Kind of on the slower side. Battlefield 4 maybe has, I could be wrong on this, but maybe a little more acceleration between strafing. but largely I would say it feels 95 to like 99% similar. I mentioned crouching. Crouching in this game is a big thing. In gunfights, you can really throw in the crouches in Battlefield 4, okay? And it makes you harder to hit. So that is something that I believe is different between Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. The sprint speed of Battlefield 4. I mean, again, I would consider this to be quite an average sprint speed, guys. Like, I don't know. Not really anything crazy. Nothing really nuts going on here. Now, the main difference that people will point out with Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 is air strafing in Battlefield 4 matters a whole lot more. So, for instance, if you're, moving on someone here and you just want to go, you can really flip your mouse around and you can really air strafe a ton, right? And I just, accidentally did the vaulting glitch, but haha, yeah. So, I'll just show you what that means. So, air strafing, mentioned it in Battlefield 3, but the mouse didn't affect air strafing in Battlefield 3. Both the keys as an WASD and the mouse affects air strafing in Battlefield 4, meaning you can do really crazy movement tricks with the movement. So when I do something like this, right? Jump this direction and strafe back that direction. It might not look like much in first person, but in third person, I'm actually moving quite a large distance on someone's monitor. And then, of course, you can combine this, almost every peek you do with the ADS stabilization jump. Throw little crouch spams in here, and you get Battlefield 4's movement. One key difference, you cannot vault while aiming down sights in Battlefield 4 like you could in Battlefield 3. As you can see here. Now again, I'm sure some turbo Battlefield 4 sweat will comment down below. Enders, you forgot this certain thing that I use all the time. I'm very sorry. Okay, very sorry. I don't play this game anymore. I basically can't, because you'll get stream sniped and DDoSed. So, let's just say it's not worth the hassle. But in general, I would say the main difference moving from Battlefield 3 to 4 is the addition of air strafing, right? Air strafing is really important in this game. So there's that. On to Battlefield 1, and this should really be a stark difference. Ambiance on Battlefield 1. Welcome to my house, guys. Yeah. I just bought the place. Yeah, it's fine. So we're gonna use my front yard to demonstrate Battlefield 1's movement, or lack thereof. Now, one thing to point out here before I go over anything. A lot of people will argue, oh, Battlefield 1's movement better fits the setting, blah, blah, blah. Wrong. I would argue that this is a video game and movement isn't really setting-based, to be honest. And I should also point out that Battlefield 1's movement has changed drastically compared to release to what we have right now. So, the release version of Battlefield 1 had this really powerful slide that has been reduced to, well, this. A slide that traps you in a very, forward motion. You have absolutely no control over it. Doesn't really matter. You can't really ADS. You can't, utilize it in any aggressive manner. It is essentially exclusively used to slide into cover. That's basically the only thing that you should use it for. You can never peek someone like this. Does not work. And, yeah. That's basically it with Battlefield 1 slide. Now, how did it used to differ? Why was it so important to Battlefield 1's gameplay? Well, I'll try to find some gameplay with the pre-nerf slide. But basically, the pre-nerf slide was the only aggressive engagement movement option that added depth and a skill gap to Battlefield 1. And they removed it. So what do we have left in Battlefield 1? Well, the sprint speed is, I'd say largely pretty standard. movement, in terms of strafing, you'll notice there's a bit of an acceleration here. Go back and watch Battlefield 3, go back and watch Battlefield 4, and you will notice that when I strafe here and change directions, there's that little slight slow period when you first change direction, then you sort of accelerate into the normal speed. This might not seem like much, but actually in terms of how this affects gameplay, it's huge. You really have to be very careful how often you change directions. And it also means that when you peak, you can't necessarily go back around the corner in a very responsive, quick fashion. In terms of any other more advanced things here, you cannot, can't vault while ADS. It's not a thing in this game, as far as I'm aware. Nope, not a thing in this game. Crouching. Crouching cannot be used in gunfights. You will die. In fact, when you crouch in gunfight, you slow yourself to a standstill. And you honestly you just sort of get yourself killed. In terms of jump peeking, you cannot jump peek in Battlefield 1. It might look like you can. I promise you, go try it in the game. You will die. It is not effective. You cannot do it. In terms of other things in Battlefield 1's movement, there is nothing in this game's movement. And I'm sorry, but it's a massive problem in terms of gameplay. Because when you remove all of the aggressive movement options, like Battlefield 1 did, the gameplay becomes something similar to this. I wonder who's in this hole. My point is, it slows the game to an absolute crawl, and there is essentially 0 to learn, 0 to master, and there is absolutely no gameplay depth in terms of movement, which is a bit of a shame, to be completely honest with you. Now, moving on to Battlefield 5's movement, which is drastically different compared to Battlefield 1. Jumping over from Battlefield 1's movement to Battlefield 5's movement, there are a lot of additions and changes. So, most importantly, you can, prone on your back in Battlefield 5. You can crouch run in Battlefield 5, which a lot of people like. And there is a feature in the game that allows you to jump from a very high distance, hit a button while you hit the ground, and this activates a roll that heavily reduces your fall damage, which is very, very useful. And I believe there's also a ledge grab in this game, so can grab ledges. Now, what are the main differences? So the strafing is, again, fairly basic. It's a little less acceleration heavy than Battlefield 1's strafing, so it feels more responsive in that regard. And in this game, there are sort of 2 different ADS movement speeds. So you have this ADS movement speed, and I'll get closer to something just to show you how fast you can peek corners with this. There's this ADS movement speed. You can use this with weapons that have the ADS movement speed specialization, and this is a weapon without it, so this will give you the base ADS movement speed or the normal ADS movement speed. As you can see, significantly slower compared to weapons with the ADS movement speed specialization put on it. In terms of crouching in this game, obviously is, it's in the game just so you can crouch against things. But in terms of using it in combat, crouching is actually pretty terrible in this game. I would not recommend doing it, and it is, it's not as good as Battlefield 4's crouching, let's say. One of the biggest controversies in this game is the fact that this game is, of course, the second Battlefield game with a slide, but this slide is not turbo nerfed like Battlefield 1. In fact, this slide is more akin to release Battlefield 1 slide. You have some directional control. You can sort of start sliding forward and slide backward like I just did there. You can slide all the way to the left, slide to the left, slide to the right, right? You can just fucking slide to the left, slide to the right, you know what I'm saying? You can jump and then land sliding. You can jump and then land and hit toggle crouch. So if you jump hit toggle crouch in midair and then land, you can slide across the ground just a little bit without activating the slide, actually. As you can see here. I'm not activating the slide, meaning this. I'm just saying you can slide across the ground if you jump, hit toggle crouch, and then land. In terms of how you use the slide, you basically can just use this to, you know, juke people out in close quarters. You know, some guy is trying to peek you right, you can go boom, boom, that sort of thing. And Battlefield 5 restores some legacy features from Battlefield 3 and 4 that weren't really usable in Battlefield 1, but were still in Battlefield 1. So what I'm meaning is the ADS stabilization jump that I showed you in the beginning of the video in Battlefield 3 is back in Battlefield 5. As you can see here, it is back in Battlefield 5, and you can still decide whether to land crouch or whether to land standing. Standing there, and then crouched here. In terms of other things with Battlefield 5's movement, Battlefield 5 is the first game I can remember, at least, or I believe the first Battlefield game, where you can actually continue to shoot while jumping. The very first game that introduced this. You could not do this previously in other Battlefield games. In other Battlefield games, you would have to jump, land, then you could shoot. In this game, you can shoot anytime you want in midair. Now, in this game, you can also manually lean. This is the very first Battlefield game that added manual leaning. And you can combine all of these things together. So you can slide and then lean. You can jump and then switch lean. So I leaned left to right there. You can switch lean while sliding. You can jump, switch lean, and then slide, and then lean to the left, and then crouch. You can do a bunch of things with Battlefield 5's movement. And in general, even though the slide is controversial in this game, I would say that Battlefield 5, looking back at it, overall has the best Battlefield movement ever made. It has depth. It has interesting quirks and features. Shout out Doug DeMiro. And it is overall enjoyable. Now, there is one more thing that I can't necessarily show you here, but let's say there's an imaginary windowsill here, right? There's a window. You can actually jump, hit toggle crouch in midair, and if you time it perfectly, you can bounce off of the lower windowsill through the window and retain your momentum. That is very useful and helps you navigate buildings more quickly compared to other players, and it is fairly difficult to hit, especially during, you know, aggressive gameplay, so it is definitely very skillful. So, that is all the things that I can possibly remember about Battlefield 5's movement. Let's go over to Battlefield 2042. Moving into Battlefield 2042's movement, it's actually really different compared to any other Battlefield's movement. Now, whether or not it's better or worse, that's up to you. It's worth noting that this is a new engine for Battlefield 2042, which means that the legacy features like the ADS stabilization jump, that feature is not in Battlefield 2042, because again, it's a new engine. So I would say the sprint speed is a little faster for this game, definitely. I would say the strafing, again, a little more responsive, a little faster. And this game is the third Battlefield game with a slide. The slide in this game is more akin to Battlefield 1 post-nerf slide, meaning it's definitely not as good as BF5 slide. So I'll just demonstrate that for you right now. It's just, you know, it's useful. You can peek with it, right? You can definitely slide into a peek. That is a benefit of it compared to Battlefield 1. You can definitely slide into a peek. But the slide in this game is mainly used for sliding into cover and gaining momentum on your jumps. I would say slide peeking is only maybe a small use, but it is a use for it. So the reason why I say this Battlefield game's movement is so different compared to other Battlefield games is this game is really, really jump heavy. Like, very jump heavy. This is the second Battlefield game where you can shoot while jumping and be accurate. And this game is really jump peak heavy. So there are three main types of jump peaks. There's simply, you know, gaining just a little bit of speed and then jumping. That's, I mean, it's the most basic thing ever, right? Just not even with sliding, just doing a dry, just jump peak with no slide. Then to gain a little bit more speed and distance, you can get a bit of a running start, slide, then jump. And then optionally, when you land, you can jump a second time. Jumping a third time, you know, it can be okay, but you kind of, you see you gradually lose momentum with each jump. And then the most advanced and the greatest distance carrying jump peak technique is you basically get a running start, jump, and then land sliding, and then continue jumping. So I'll show you that right now. And this is really one of the fastest ways to cover ground in this game. And it's also one of the best ways to peek people in this game. Now, it is worth noting that crouching in this game is very, very strong. It's a smoother sort of crouch compared to previous Battlefield games, meaning your player model sort of smoothly goes up and down, in and out of the crouch animation, and you can crouch changing directions while strafing in this game. And it does affect your third-person character model, which makes it very, very strong to crouch at least 2 or 3 times in a gunfight. If you try to do it any more than that, you will see you will get a penalty for it, and basically you just screw yourself and you can't move. So that is basically the gist of Battlefield 2042. It is absolutely the most jump-heavy Battlefield ever. And, you know, the slide is sort of useful, but it's mainly jumping, crouch spamming, and sliding to gain momentum. Now, on to my final thoughts and just some remarks about Battlefield and its movement in general. So I hope this video helped clear up some misconceptions and maybe some confusion regarding Battlefield and what you can actually do with the game's movement systems. I know some people are not going to agree with some of the things that I said in this video. The main point of the video was to demonstrate what you can do in the games, but you might have noticed that I was really harsh on Battlefield 1 for essentially intentionally nerfing and dumbing down every single aspect of the movement. And I'm not just hating on Battlefield 1 in that regard, just to hate on Battlefield 1. I'm hating on them heavily nerfing and reducing movement options because it legitimately destroys gameplay, and it does remove a lot of the depth from the gameplay. And as a result of there being little to nothing to learn with the movement, it is very restrictive and very limited. And I suppose you could argue that that is the style of Battlefield 1, or that that is what they were going for, but it clearly isn't, because they designed Battlefield 1 with the slide in mind, and when they removed the slide, they didn't consider what it would do to the gameplay, which shows a fundamental lack of understanding from DICE regarding that particular decision. Aside from just talking about Battlefield 1, you can see the transition from Battlefield 3 all the way from 2042. You can see that the game's movement is completely different compared to those older games. In 2042, it is much more jump focused. You can actually shoot while in midair and be accurate, whereas in Battlefield 3 and 4, you could really only place your jump peaks and engage targets while you are landing, with maybe a couple crouches thrown in here and there. Then with Battlefield 5, I would argue that that is probably the most complex Battlefield movement system if you don't count the glitches available in Battlefield 4. In Battlefield 5, I demonstrated all of the uses of the slide, how you could lean while sliding, how you could shoot in midair while switching leans and then land sliding, how you could utilize all of the different ADS stabilization jumps with your jump peaks, alongside of how to utilize maybe crouch running or the roll that reduces fall damage. And overall, I truly believe the future of Battlefield movement lies somewhere in a happy middle ground. Now, is there a happy middle ground with the Battlefield community when it comes to movement? Honestly, guys, probably not. No one is ever going to agree, and this comment section is probably going to be filled with people that don't agree with some of the things I said here. But I do certainly hope people will consider what I am saying in regards to why Battlefield 1's movement system is not the way to go. It sacrifices too much depth and doesn't really add anything in return. I think the happy middle ground is somewhere in between Battlefield 4 and 3, combining it with Battlefield 5's movement. You could take aspects from all of those games, smash it together, and you could get, well, all sorts of combinations, but I think a combination does exist where it would be pretty in-depth, but also easy to learn and understand, and it wouldn't be too ridiculous. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this cleared some things up. I hope that you gained some understanding or learned some new things about Battlefield movement. And if I missed some things about Battlefield movement, I apologize. There's a lot of stuff to go over. I tried to write as many notes as I possibly could. Please comment down below if I missed something that maybe is your favorite about any of these Battlefield games. And of course, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I stream every single day at twitch.tv/enders and on this very YouTube channel. Be sure to turn notifications on so you don't miss a stream or an upload. I will see you guys in the next video.